Okay, many of you will recognize this as the image of Gilgamesh, and the famous Sumerian demigod king. He's holding a lion there, and we'll get into a better picture of that soon. Behind him, you see the cosmos. In fact, what you really are looking at is the zodiac. We're going to get into something here about this. I recently had somebody fairly famous get on one of my old videos, Dr. Ralph Ellis, and he's written a lot of articles. This is one of his, but he's also written a lot of books and things. In fact, I've seen some of his work, especially his old work that's on the ancient people of Edessa, King Isis, all the things that go along with that, and the Shroud of Turin, and so on. But he's apparently done a whole lot more research since then and got a lot more stuff out for looking into him. And then I find this, and it's back from 2015, but it's kind of a verifier, and it's something that I talked about recently and opened my mouth and said there's a whole zodiacal show where you can go around the zodiac making the stories of the Bible in different ones. And I said so in one where I'm revealing how the Bible connects to the stories of Genesis through Gilgamesh's tale and a few others. And anyhow, let's just get into this, and because it's liable to go into a double parter here. If it does, it'll be in your top left hand corner at the end of the next part. The ancient Epic of Gilgamesh and the procession of the equinox. Gilgamesh is one of the ancient, or is the ancient Sumerian epic, written some 4,000 years ago on cuneiform tablets and rediscovered only in the 19th century. It's a story that echoes of biblical Old Testament with its geographical details of a great flood and the formation of mankind from the dust of the earth. The bulk of the story is devoted to a king of Sumer known as Gilgamesh and his epic quest into the mystical forests of Cedar or Kedar, where he performs many heroic deeds. Now there's this symbolic hero that goes through time that we can all see, and every superhero has a little bit of that flavor, but this is a Sumerian epic written about this time, and we're going to see how it probably goes from the time much earlier than that. But there's biblical connections there, and I've made a few videos about it. Origins, Genesis, and so on. Sumerian connections. There's a few little series that I did there. In fact, one of them I picked totally apart Genesis just in the first telling of it and telling you what this goes and how this works with the other one and so on, back and forth. Although this epic story from the beginnings of recorded history contains mythical elements, it is nevertheless thought to be a biography of this Sumerian king, making his mark on the world, a story of daring do by a heroic princeling, like some king that was going to come into power. And so, if you look at the simple tale of it, though, it's basically where he gets power and eventually goes to his head and he gets out of whack, but he's huge and he makes all these people have to challenge him apparently to fights and so on, and he also wants the first date, if you will, with anybody who's going to get married with their wife the first night and so on, and they say, well, that's bad, and so Enkidu forms. We'll get into all that here. Let's just go ahead and get into it. But it is entirely possible that this classical interpretation is an error, both in its interpretation and its chronology. Indeed, the Gilgamesh epic may be up to 600 years younger than previously thought. Well, why is he saying that? Well, he'll tell you in a second, but it's to put it in the correct zodiacal house so the story goes correct. During the research for the book Jesus, Last of the Pharaohs, Ralph Ellis had been working on the theory that the bulk of the biblical Old Testament was, in fact, based on similar theology found in Egypt and in Sumer. Wow, I got to check out that book because yeah, it's a lot one of my things are about. Well, its constant reference to bulls, sheep, and fish, the Bible portrays definite echoes of an ancient astrological religion, a story of the constellations into which the history of the patriarchal family has been grafted. In other words, you go back and you say, well, bull, sheep, and fish, yeah, that's Taurus, Aries, and then Pisces. And we just ran through that, and now we're in the dawning of the age of Aquarius. Just like that song, the hippie song when we were growing up. Fifth Dimension. Anybody ever heard of that? Anyhow, but the story of the Bible and patriarchal family goes across that too, and you can be telling that in the Zodiac also. But in the Gilgamesh epic, we find a similar epic tale of a battle with bulls and sheep, one that can just possibly be interpreted as a clash of the stellar constellations, or a battle between Aries and Taurus. What? Yeah, but I'm going to show you that it's actually, the Taurus, there's Leo, right? And then Scorpio and stuff as it goes back. And I'm going to tell you that it actually comes from Leo into Taurus. But we'll get there. There's a bunch of missing spots here. But so here's ancient Gilgamesh, and everybody says, well, he's got to be a giant. Well, a giant of a man can be somebody that's not necessarily so tall. And in modern standards, too, it could just be somebody, maybe he's 6'3", and everybody else is about 5'5", 5'6", 5'8", maybe, and stuff. And he's always, but also giant of a man is somebody that's doing things, that's done incredible things. As men of well renown, men of old. Well, here he is depicting that fact, and he's holding up a lion like a cat, like a household cat. Seriously. Yeah, really no much bigger than that. And that's got to be a grown lion. It's got all its fur in it and everything like that. You could try to say, well, maybe it's a, no, that's a lion. But it's also a Barbary lion. If you can see under whatever its belly is, also has all the fur just like the mane does. In fact, there's tufts going all the way back on it. And this is a sign that of the Barbary lion type lions and the northern lions that used to exist all across Europe through the end of the last ice age. So some of the things have inklings that are even going back to that point. But that's probably a retelling and so on. We'll get to that point though. For this is like a master of beasts. And you want to talk about the two that are side by side that I've done videos about here recently. And they're holding the master of beasts. And even there's a feminine version we talked about with the Potnia. But he's only holding one. Well, what's he holding in his other hand then? Well, his other hand is what some say is one of the horns of Taurus. Yeah. All the way down to the sandals. Gilgamesh the Hunter, a relief from Khorsabad, now in the Louvre Museum, though. An ancient epic was actually a story of Orion the Hunter and the processional battle with Taurus. Well, kind of gave it up there a little early, but here, let's go with it. It's an established fact that the constellations slowly changed their position with reference to the sun as the millennia passed slowly. About 1 degree every 72 years here, but with each constellation being dominant at the vernal or spring equinox dawn for about 2,000 years or so, and then you're reaching on to the next one. By the way, it's doing that weird thing like whenever you see a wagon wheel in the movies, and after they get going at a certain speed, it seems to almost stop, and then it starts going backwards. Because the constellations aren't rolling in the sky like you think they would. They're slowly going backwards over time. Yeah, it's another layer to it. But this process is known as the precession. And that's a good statement. Procession. Currently, we are in the last centuries of Pisces, the fish, While the previous constellation was Aries, the ram, the change between Aries and Pisces happened in around 10 AD, but there's a cusp situation and so on. And so it actually was a herald of it at that time. And this is why Jesus was said to have been born as a Lamb of God, Aries, but become a fisher of men, Pisces. As one can readily see, the last vestiges of an ancient astrological religion are still clearly visible within early Nazarene Christianity. And I've done other videos about Nazarites and how they have only a few descriptions of Jesus and so on. This guy's got videos about that too, and definitely goes into depth about certain aspects of it, of course, too. But what we're talking about here is them going through processions, and I've talked about before how even the Lamassu, or the cherubim, that creature that looks like it's made out of a bunch of things that people are like, what the hell is that? That manticore is actually points on the zodiac of the zodiacal symbols at that time. And there's a few differences of them, but that's because there's a few differences of one of the zodiac things in each one of them's different positions. Also, as it changes, it clicks another notch, doesn't it? So, however, back in the early part of Middle Kingdom of Egypt, a similar change in the constellations was about to occur. Taurus was about to cede its rule to the next constellation in line, Aries. Here comes Aries rolling around. While a computer planisphere can precisely date these astronomical eras, and it appears that the era of Taurus, the bull, lasted until about 1750, when Aries, the sheep, or ram, came into ascendance. This date is very close to the era of the first Hyksos pharaohs and the shepherd kings of Egypt. It's quite possible, therefore, that this stage or change in the astronomical alignments may have influenced the rise of the Hyksos shepherd pharaohs or the followers of Aries in Lower Egypt, and perhaps even precipitated the evil or the civil war in which they were eventually thrown out of Egypt. Now, he mentions the Hyksos is coming in that date, and that might have been something different. We've done a recent video which shows that the Hyksos were actually endemic people that had been there for quite some time. That it wasn't just an invasion, but that there was a point where these people came in all of a sudden with their horses and chariots and so on, but were just adopted in, and part of those people that left. But whenever they left, the Egyptians already had, of course, that, and that helped carry them through the final kingdoms they had going on there, and were able to stand up to all the other people that messed with them, and it kept them in charge for a good long while. So he tells you this dates, though, very close to around the Hyksos pharaohs that come a little bit after this. Followers of Aries, well, we know that they had to hook up with that and Saturn, but we also know at this time that there was a more worship in Khnum, and if you look at that, that's a ram god too. And also the processional places and temples that are built by these people, Ramses and other ones that are built at this time, the procession going in are sphinxes. But the sphinxes don't even have Ramses' head on them, or they've got a ram instead of Ramses on the head, but that is Aries, and that's what that hooks up. In the time of Aryans, and people have tried to make that into, okay, well, the Aryans, this is when they were, no, actually, it goes all the way through. That's just the time of Aries in a block that's given in that. For they were the same people before and pre-dynastic all the way through. I mean, and the same people in Sumeria and so places. All the places we're talking about, Bible and everything too, but let's continue. So in what way, if any, does all this relate to the Epic of Gilgamesh? Well, the first clue is that the Sumerian tale may be more than just a simple tale of princes and kings, and maybe instead a priestly account of a cosmic clash in the heavens above. Is that Gilgamesh's companion Enkidu is described as being like a meteor. What? Yeah, so there's a weird conflagration, and I've told you there's a few different ways of looking at this, and a few statements that make everything different, that sometimes are lacuna, or missing little pieces off of tablets, but we'll get to that. This star of heaven is written on tablets, which descends like a meteor from the sky, which you tried to lift but found too heavy. This is the strong comrade or friend, the one who brings help to his friend in need. And they make a nomenclature of comrade in there, but of course a lot of these tablets went to Germany and so on, and they're reading in that. What does that mean? Well, it's a little different than just friend or acquaintance that you know that you don't hate. It means a lot more than that. For he brings help to a friend in need. Brings help to a friend in need. He found it too heavy to lift this meteor from the sky. What the hell? Is there somehow a meteor connected with the flood that did something? Was a sign that they remembered, just like a star in Bethlehem type of thing. Is it possible they're remembering from back in the Younger Dryas whenever something like this happened? But apparently he found a meteor. But they're saying that Enkidu was a meteor. He was iron, though, and this is none of the Iron Age people. We're doing that thing again, where King Tut's dagger is made out of meteorific iron, and they're like, no, and they try to let's just walk away. Let's just walk away. And we're like, no, let's talk about this. Here we see a tablet. Amazingly, they found enough of these tablets to where pieces that are knocked off, like the sides here, can be recreated to the point they can tell you the story all the way through and down. But what happens on a lot of them is one side, maybe even the bottom, like this one, is basically shattered off. And because it happened to so many of them, they didn't really have it. But now they found the bottom piece here. And I've told you in an old ancient video I found back in old bulletin board days before the internet, that this guy had it, and actually him doing that or whatever, and trying to say that it was, actually got him pretty much fired and everything off of it. But I don't want to go into that, but it leads to the very end part of it. I've done a video about it a good long while ago now. The texts go on to describe Enkidu in great detail, though. But it said he was a meteor there at that one point, and it alludes to ideas about meteors too heavy to lift and all these things. The illusion is quite obvious. Enkidu is a stellar object. Gilgamesh himself, in turn, is described as arming himself for the coming quest and battle in the following fashion. Gilgamesh took the axe, he slung the quiver from his shoulder, and the bow of Anshan, which that name itself is quite telling, and I could go off, let's stay on track, and buckled the sword to his belt, so they were armed and ready for the journey. So you'd have a sword dangling down, bow, and a hangback axe, right? I had something to say there, I'll just leave that alone. In stellar terms, the illusion is again quite plain. The axe in the right hand, the bow in the left hand, the sword hanging from his prominent belt. Surely Gilgamesh was not a king, but this was indeed the Sumerian name for the constellation of Orion, or Iron, or Arian. Take a look at his diagram of Arian and see if the similarities. Quite obviously, Orion has all the attributes ascribed to Gilgamesh, And so the Gilgamesh epic just has to be a story about a cosmic battle of the constellations. Well, I'm saying it works in a twofold way, and that in a lot of ways, whenever they have a mythology like this, they're using something like this so everybody can remember it, and there's the story in the stars for now this constellation becomes this, and there's the guy, and so you've got it like that, and it's an easier way to remember it. I mean, it's not like, oh man, I lost that painting. No, you didn't. Tonight when the campfire goes out, walk out in the open and then look up. There it is right there. There's the story. It's written in the stars, right? Yeah, it ain't going to change, but real slowly over a long time, this story will be around for a lot longer. And what's amazing about the story of Gilgamesh is it's the very first real good story we have, and it's an incredible epic that tells you all of this great things, but he's in a search for immortality, especially after he finds that Enkidu passes away right in front of him and so on, and that's part of the rest of the story. But here when we're looking at this, one can see Orion. Let me take this out of the way. Orion's belt, and then hanging down from his belt would be the sword. You can see that runs basically straight. Later there's another depiction which is a little bit more Greeky, a little bit more modern, Elizabethan if you will, and it shows a slight difference, variation in this form. And there are quite a few variations on this. And this bow, axe and club, but then also what's right in front of him? Well, right in front of him is Taurus, and importantly to remember is the Pleiades, and we've talked about this a bunch. And now this puts three things together for us, guys. For the Pleiades is a symbol of Halloween. For right now, if you went outside tonight, you might see some stars. We're coming right through Halloween. Through now, all the way through the time of Halloween, but greater right about the time of the day before Halloween and the day after, which becomes All Saints Day and everything. And I've made videos about it, one last year, that talks about how ancient cultures that were not even connected had this same dating go on, and it seems to be something they carried all the way back from whenever that little meteor shower let loose some big chunks instead of little ones. And now we're talking about Enkidu being a meteor and so on like that, and how it connects to it. And now this is the killing of the bull situation, Golgalana, the great bull of heaven. So we start to make a few connections, but it gets thicker. Where are we at? 22, let's go. So you see the Pleiades and so on. Thus Gilgamesh was written as an epic of the heavens, an impending battle of the constellations, and the greatest of all the constellations, Orion, was arming himself to do battle with the cosmos. But Gilgamesh, Orion, does not know the way, so is only fitting that he needs Enkidu, the meteor, or perhaps Sirius, the dog star, to lead the way. It even says, let Enkidu lead the way. He knows the road to the forest of stars, maybe. The mountain of cedars, the dwelling place of the gods. Well, a lot of people, when they interpreted this out, were talking about, well, he's going to go far north in there, and so north of the Sumerian area. And this is going to go back up through the Tigris and Euphrates River, they called Eden itself. And so there's another biblical connection, but up through there into these people. Well, the lords of Arata, and it's only kind of the people that they really called lords of everything, had come before them, and they were great artisans and all this thing of fame. They talked to them about fame, and a lot of people made connection that maybe this is whenever something like that had gone wrong. Up and to the right of them are Guitans and so on, but this dwelling place of the gods, is this someone else has temples up there and so on? Or is this an ancient place like Göbekli Tepe and so on, where there used to be mountains of cedars around there, but there's not anymore? You know, how many times do we read in Egypt and all these places that they sent to these places like this to get a bunch of cedars and wood, because Egypt ran out of wood, but a lot of places too, and Sumer didn't. And so, with all the pulling on that and no ability to really regrow it, it's the reason that you only see today little patches out there. And they people still keep some of them sacred, definitely. But at one time, that area was quite forested, especially coming out of the Younger Dryas, and the area was whole wetter all the way through to 5,000 years ago, and then it started to squelch up. Things happened. Volcanoes added to it, and so on. We've talked about this recently and come through, and that, looking at it, that must have caused the drought. Once we get to the point of having a record over here in South America and in Europe and stuff, we can see, wow, during this exact same time period, they all got screwed over. And that's because of this volcano over here, and Krakatoa and so on. Pardon me. The ancient tale then goes on to describe the purpose of Gilgamesh, or Orion's quest. Isn't that an old game, Orion's Quest? It is to slay the constellation of Taurus the bull, much like Mithras. Yeah. He's wearing that Phrygian cap and so on, and he stabs the bull in his Pleiadian shoulder, making blood spurt out, and then the other things around it have to do with constellations. In stellar terms, this is perfectly logical. It is the constellation of Orion, who is armed with the axe, the bow, and his sword hanging from his prominent belt. It is Orion who had drawn his bow and has aimed it at the adjacent constellation of Taurus. But when you look at it here, see if I can get it about right. It's too bad, but you can't actually see the Pleiades. They'd be just out of shot right up here in the corner, about here. But this is where they always get stabbed and so on going. Mention here for a moment the bullseye, Aldebaran. Yeah, and it's in Star Wars and stuff. It's the reason I tell you, when I was growing up and everything, it was just all around me. Don't blow up Aldebaran. Well, some of it has to do with other things. You know, eventually you have a supernova in that area, and it leaves behind this little nebula, like the Orion Nebula, Crab Nebula, and other ones that are around in these places. Stuff of it makes you think that maybe they recorded that in some way, and then there's this bullseye situation. But the land down here is known as Eridanus, and it's supposed to have been this river and that runs through there, and also the Milky Way and things and stuff. And it's, oh yeah, you can make up a whole set of stories about it, definitely. But as you look at this, it's him going to slay Taurus pretty much in that position. But some people have said, well, that could be interpreted a different way and still be the same guy. For instead of holding the arm up here, he could be drawing back, and these ones here could make up a bow. But in this interpretation, it's the one of elder interpretation, and it's a club being held up at this time, because at this depiction, it's actually Hercules, or the trials of Samson, if you will. And he goes through the same 12 in the zodiac and has to go through it. Many people have made this connection before. But you look on his other arm where he's pointing out, and this is the golden fleece of the people of the Colchian and Georgian area of the Aegis, if you will. And we've made connections about that recently too. It shows you that. Well, in some of them, that's his shield, and this is his sword back here. Yeah, well, his shield is the Aegis, but his belt is the belt of Orion. Add to this, behind him right there, if you can just barely see it, there's a unicorn. Yeah. Well, in the story, you have to fight some incredible creature. We'll get into it in a minute, but it can be about a unicorn. But we've also talked about how in olden days, a unicorn wasn't a horse, which was a mythical creature to some people before it came to their land, with a narwhal horn coming out of it, which is another mythical creature from over here that was used in ways and wizards and things. For it used to mean the one-horned rhino. And it's best if I do it here instead of try to come back to it and explain it to you. But you notice how that's the horse here, and then there's dots coming up this way, not out the forehead. Although you can use these, but you have to kind of use their hand. But then there's one off it and goes like that. Well, no, what if it comes up from his end of his nose area and it uses those right there, and that is that big one-horned rhino? But no, the rhino isn't that big of a horn on him usually and all that stuff. Yeah, well, the ancient one that died off at the Younger Dryas, the true unicorn, was. There used to also, along with the lions we talk about being in the north and so on and this, that, and the other, used to be a giant rhino, woolly rhino, with a huge giant horn on it. It would look more like that. We'll talk about that more in a second. Let's go. For now, we're at 30. Orion the Hunter battling Taurus the Bull. In this 19th century depiction, the axe has become a club, though, and the bow has become the skin of the Nemean lion. Aha! Thus Orion is being associated there with Hercules. And so it would appear that the processional change in the constellations from Taurus to Aries that is also alluded to in both the Egyptian and biblical text is about to unfold once more. But here in Sumer, it is the hero Gilgamesh, in the guise of Orion the Hunter, who is reported as killing the bull of heaven, Golgalana, the constellation of Taurus. But first, Gilgamesh has to seek out the watcher of the forest of the stars, is saying, a fearsome beast called Humbaba. Now, this sacred cedar forest they're talking about there is actually north of there, and everybody knows it, so they're going up that way. How far north? Do they walk up into the sky? Well, in his tale, he goes to the edges of the earth, trying to find immortality. But also, this fearful beast, Humbaba, may not necessarily be that unicorn, for what's right back on the zodiac there? Well, it's Leo. They don't show it in here, but if you look at some of the depictions of Humbaba, he's got this weird clown-faced almost onto him, like he's some Maori guy going, you know, or whatever on his face. Yeah, it almost looks like some kind of mask or something. Well, that also looks a lot like a lot of the depictions of Medusa when you see her on shields, rather than having the snake-haired look of somebody, you know, with a tapered face. It's rounded and even vampire-y fangs looking stuff. Right? That's what he kind of looks like. And then there's a maze all hooked up with it. In a lot of the depictions of him, they found a perfect little maze, like, you know, when you're a kid and you can draw and go through, try to find the middle of a maze. It's made just like that, like a hedge maze. Much like a labyrinth. In fact, they talk about his domain being something like that. And then now we've got stories of bulls with labyrinths and so on. And well, there's those guys way over there in the Mediterranean got this whole deal with a labyrinth and bull, don't they? It's a little different, but let's continue. At the third blow, Humbaba fell. Now the mountains were moved, all the hills where the guardian of forest was killed. The 7 splendors of Humbaba were extinguished. For a 4,000-year-old story, the prose is still clear as today as when it was written if you know the subject matter. There is one guardian of the constellation of Taurus, and that is the Pleiades. It's a little cluster of constellations. It's known as the 7 Sisters, a small group of 7 stars that are visible to the naked eye and reside on the back of Taurus. From this elevated position, the Humbaba, the Pleiades, could watch over the constellation of Taurus and protect it. Thus, if it was extinguished, Taurus' back would be exposed and vulnerable. Here was the weak spot for the hero Gilgamesh to attack. And I guess I can see that interpretation onto it. And then whenever, I don't think he's going to talk about it here, but now we have the torrid meteor shower, which really comes right out from there. So, I mean, nothing looks like the stars animate and attack each other or anything during this, of course, but it's set up to do it, and then this thing happens out of it. And the sisters is pretty much about where the sore emanates from, if you will, or the wound, the blood, which become the asteroids now, which Enkidu's attached to. We've already. But if we go back on the zodiac here, just a step, like a minute ago, he was holding Taurus horns and Leo. And we say Humbaba's a lion-faced like creature, and then this lion-looking face straight on at you with its mouth open. Wow, that his fangs and did that's it. That looks a lot more like it. You can call it a lion man. It's a lot more like that. But Taurus' back is exposed and vulnerable. Here we see a weak spot for Orion to attack. Ooh. I'll make another connection here in just a second. Check this out. It says, now thrust your sword between the nape, which is a neck, and the horns. So Gilgamesh followed the bull. He seized the thick of its tail, and he thrust the sword between the nape and the horns, and slew the bull. When they had killed the bull of heaven, they cut out his heart and gave it to Shamash, the sun, and the brothers rested. Well, now it's calling them brothers. But the strange thing is they come from separated roots. One was a wild man that got sought civilization, but yet were they ancient brothers at one time? All you had to do is shave him up and get it going. Strangely, in the tale, he's able to talk to him right off the bat, but maybe that's just a way of conveyance because, you know, that isn't the way it could have worked out, really, could it? If he was a wild man running with the animals, basically Tarzan, then all of a sudden Jane shows up, then he shows up, and hey, Tarzan, Jane, me. Hey, well, I'll talk to you in a little bit. I've got this lady I'm going to spend the night with before she gets her husband, and he goes, no, that's what I'm here to talk to you about. Let me fight you now. And they fight all night, which hooks up with Jacob of the Bible and how he wrestled with God all night and so on, but got that in another video. But note that Shamash, or Shams, or Sham, is the sun. And notice that when we talk about Shamson, or Samson, we're talking about that same thing. Ash, that part Sham is the sun, and Ash at the end of it is extremely respected. They even eventually named sacred trees out of it. Kind of works the other way, but we talked about trees. It was the end of last year. Thus Gilgamesh had slain the constellation of Taurus, and the era of Aries and the ram could now begin. This may be a rather radical interpretation of the Gilgamesh epic, but the reasoning here is further enforced by the king's list of Sumer. These show the successor of Gilgamesh as being the king Lugal Banda. Lugal Banda meaning, well, Lugal meaning big man, like Golgalana means great bull of heaven. Gul Lu or Lugal, big man Banda, who is known as a shepherd king. The era of Taurus was now over, and so accordingly King Lugal Banda became known as a shepherd. Just like the Egyptian Hyksos, shepherd pharaohs, he became a follower of the new ruling constellation of Aries. So here we have another thing that's odd, where a people at this one time were almost in unison, even though they were apart from each other, and things seem to follow suit. The problem I see there, it seems like a couple of these are close to times where big or bad things happened, and therefore that might be a reason it was dropped or started to be walked away from. But then, of course, when you have Christianity come in and everything's pagan and nobody knows which way to walk, or that they're even walking away from something. But in the Bible, during the same time, we have this bull worship going on in the same situation. And if you'll read real closely, whenever he shows up with, after going 40 years in the whole 9 yards, he turns around and God says to them, "You haven't been worshiping me. Yeah, you've been Chayun to your God in heaven, your star of Remphan." This is Saturn, who they've been worshiping, and then they haven't been worshiping him. What are they doing? Well, they've got a bull and everything going on, and he goes up to get the message and come back, and he's so pissed off with the bull, he smotes it and everything, and then, well, what the hell goes on after that? Well, then they start sacrificing rams and stuff, and so that kind of heralds it in the same situation. Thus, Gilgamesh Orion had ended up the reign of the constellation of Taurus and ushered in the rule of Aries and the Shepherd Kings. However, the Sumerian tale indicates that some of the gods were angry with this. Before he gets to that, I'm telling you by the earlier interpretation, even in the picture there, this might have come back from a point, of course, at the end of Leo into Taurus. And this is the dominating of Leo and then Taurus, as it showed in that. And if that's the effect, though they're making a big hado about it a lot later, well, yeah, but it wasn't Leo anymore, it was Taurus, but they're showing you, yeah, this had happened, and they had gone through this whole deal. So it was a series of things. Now, is it the end of Taurus? Are they ushering in Taurus with some of these things? Well, in the story, it seems like they do kill the bull of heaven and it goes on, right? Well, that's the ending time of the people telling it. How long have they been telling this tale that was a tale where they didn't kill it before? Because it was the whole thing going on with just a notch back. And the thing they had to do with lions before that. And crabs or scorpions before, and so on. Still, it lines up correctly, doesn't it? Where he tells you Ishtar uttered a curse. Well, this, of course, is Inanna. And we're about to go to part 2, and it's going to be in your top left-hand corner. So just click on it, and we'll go there when it goes. But Ishtar is Inanna, uttered a curse. "Woe to Gilgamesh, for he has scorned me in killing the bull of heaven." When Enkidu heard these words, he tore out the bull's right thigh, and he tossed it in her face, saying, "If I could lay my hands on you, this I should do to you." Oh, it sounds like some Conan the Barbarian thing, doesn't it? Slinging the whole leg of the thing at her. Oh, or screw you, or whatever. Well, there's some more to that coming up. And that also is zodiacal too. In fact, it gets worse or better. So click up in your top left-hand corner. It's coming up. And we'll just go ahead and stop it here and begin it again, the second part, right here. I'll see you there. Peace.